The late summer sun bore down mercilessly on Redemption Creek, turning the dusty main street into a furnace of heat and grit. Matthew Hale squinted against the glare as he rode into town, his weathered hands steady on the reins despite the sweat trickling down his back. The drought had been particularly cruel this year, and his cattle ranch showed it. Sparse grass, dwindling water holes, and livestock that grew thinner by the day. At 32, Matthew cut an imposing figure against the harsh landscape. Years of solitary work had carved deep lines around his gray eyes and hardened his jaw into a permanent expression of stoic determination. Since his father's death 2 winters past, he'd run the ranch alone, speaking more to his horses than to people. The townspeople knew him as a man of few words but absolute reliability. When Matthew Hale gave his word, it was as good as scripture. The reason for his visit to town today sat heavy in his chest like a stone. Marriage. Not for love or companionship, but for survival. The bank had made it clear, without a wife to prove stability and continuity, they wouldn't extend the loan he desperately needed to keep the ranch afloat through another failed season. As his horse's hooves clattered on the wooden planks outside the Grand Hotel, Matthew caught sight of the Whitmore family's hired carriage. Eastern made, all polish and pretense. It looked as out of place in Redemption Creek as a peacock among vultures. He'd heard plenty about the Whitmores from the gossiping tongues at the general store, a once prominent Boston family fallen on hard times, seeking redemption of their own in the untamed West. Inside the hotel's modest parlor, Mrs. Constance Whitmore sat rigid as a fence post, her black bombazine dress absorbing what little light filtered through the dusty windows. Despite their reduced circumstances, she maintained an air of Eastern superiority that seemed to dare the frontier to break her. Beside her, 2 young women waited in silence. Clarissa Whitmore commanded attention like a flame draws moths. At 23, she possessed the kind of beauty that turned heads and stopped conversations. Golden hair artfully arranged despite the heat. Cornflower blue eyes that sparkled with barely concealed ambition, and a figure that her traveling dress couldn't quite modest. She held herself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her power over men, though Matthew noticed how her gloved fingers drummed impatiently against her skirts, betraying her eagerness to be anywhere but this dust-blown town. In Clarissa's shadow sat her younger sister, Eloise. Where Clarissa blazed, Eloise seemed to fade into the wallpaper, dressed entirely in black mourning attire. She kept her dark eyes downcast, hands folded in her lap with the stillness of someone who'd learned to make herself invisible. At 19, she should have been blooming with youth, but grief had stolen something vital from her. Matthew had heard whispers about a young soldier, Lieutenant Samuel Morrison, who'd promised to marry her after the war but came home in a pine box instead. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut through the thick air like a blade. Punctual, an admirable quality in a prospective husband. Matthew removed his hat, holding it awkwardly. "Ma'am?" He nodded to each woman in turn. "Miss Whitmore, Miss Eloise." Clarissa's lips curved into a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She extended her hand with the air of a queen granting favor to a subject. "Mr. Hale, Mother has told us so much about your ranch." The pause before ranch spoke volumes about her opinion of his livelihood. As Matthew took her delicate hand in his calloused one, he caught Eloise glancing up briefly. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Hers were brown, not blue like her sister's, and held depths of sorrow that made something twist in his chest. She looked away immediately, as if burned. The negotiations that followed were as dry and businesslike as a cattle auction. Mrs. Whitmore laid out Clarissa's accomplishments, her education, her skill at the pianoforte, her knowledge of proper household management. Matthew responded with facts about his ranch, 640 acres, good water rights, a solid house that needed a woman's touch. Neither Clarissa nor Eloise spoke unless directly addressed. The wedding should be soon, Mrs. Whitmore declared. This Saturday, there's no point in lengthy engagements in a place like this. Matthew noticed how Clarissa's jaw tightened at her mother's words. how her gaze drifted to the window where a group of cowboys rode past, including a well-dressed Mexican gambler whose silver conchos caught the sunlight. The man touched his hat as he passed, and Matthew saw Clarissa's cheeks flush before she forced her attention back to the conversation. "Saturday suits me fine," Matthew agreed. He needed this settled before the bank's patience ran out. As the meeting concluded and Matthew prepared to leave, he found himself pausing at the door. "Miss Eloise," he said quietly, causing the younger woman to start. "I was sorry to hear about Lieutenant Morrison. He was a good man." Eloise's eyes widened. Filling with tears, she quickly blinked away. You knew Samuel. We served in the same regiment briefly. He spoke of you often." It was a small kindness, mentioning her lost love, but Matthew saw how she treasured it, pressing her fingers to the mourning brooch at her throat. Clarissa rolled her eyes at the exchange, while Mrs. Whitmore's expression suggested she found the topic tiresome. The days leading to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. The whole town buzzed with gossip about the match, the solitary rancher and the Eastern beauty. Some called it a smart match for both parties. Others whispered that Clarissa Whitmore looked like a wild mare being forced into harness. Saturday dawned clear and mercilessly hot. The small church was packed, more out of curiosity than celebration. Matthew stood at the altar in his best suit, the collar scratching against his sun-weathered neck. Reverend Thompson waited with his prayer book, occasionally dabbing at the sweat on his brow. The wedding march began, played competently, if not enthusiastically, on the out-of-tune church piano. Clarissa appeared in the doorway, a vision in ivory silk that must have cost more than most folks in Redemption Creek saw in a year. She walked down the aisle with her chin high, but Matthew could see the trapped animal look in her eyes, the way her bouquet trembled in her grip. Behind her, Eloise followed quietly in her black dress, the only concession to the celebration a small sprig of wildflowers pinned to her collar. She kept her eyes on the floor, as if she could will herself to disappear entirely. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. Clarissa repeated her vows in a voice devoid of emotion, her gaze fixed somewhere over Matthew's shoulder. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them man and wife, she offered her cheek for the briefest possible kiss, her entire body rigid with revulsion. The wedding supper at the Grand Hotel was a stilted affair. Clarissa barely touched her food, drinking perhaps more champagne than was proper. She laughed too loudly at the Mexican gambler's jokes when he stopped by to offer congratulations, her eyes lingering on his handsome face even as Matthew sat beside her. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift away, Matthew noticed Eloise sitting alone in a corner, untouched plate before her. Something made him approach her. "Not hungry?" he asked quietly. She looked up, startled. No, I'm sorry. It's a lovely feast. It's all right." He sat beside her, feeling awkward. "I know this must be hard, watching your sister." He didn't know how to finish. "Clarissa will be a good wife to you," Eloise said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. "She just needs time to adjust to the West." Matthew doubted that very much, but he appreciated the girl's attempt at kindness. "And you? Will you be all right with your mother?" A shadow crossed her face. "Mother says I'm to come live with you and Clarissa, to help with the household until I—" She trailed off, unable to say, "until I find a husband of my own." They both knew that was unlikely. What man wanted a woman who wore her grief like a shroud? The revelation surprised Matthew. He hadn't agreed to take on both sisters, but he supposed it made sense. A gentle woman like Clarissa would need help, and Mrs. Whitmore was already making plans to return east once her daughters were settled. As the evening drew to a close, Matthew and his new bride made their way to the best room the hotel could offer for their wedding night. Clarissa walked ahead of him down the hallway, her back straight as a rifle barrel. Once inside the room, she stood by the window, staring out at the dark street. "I'll need a few moments," she said without turning around. Matthew nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I'll check on the horses." He spent longer than necessary in the stable, giving her time, trying to ignore the knot of dread in his stomach. This wasn't how a wedding night should feel. But then again, nothing about this marriage was as it should be. When he finally returned to the room, it was empty. Clarissa's wedding dress lay discarded on the floor like a shed skin. The window stood open, curtains billowing in the night breeze. On the bed, a note in hurried handwriting. "I cannot do this. Do not follow me." Matthew stood frozen for a long moment, processing what had happened. His bride had run, on their wedding night, with the Mexican gambler, no doubt. He'd seen the loaded looks between them. Fool that he was to ignore them. Anger surged through him, hot and violent, not just at Clarissa, but at himself, at the whole charade of a marriage, at the humiliation that would follow when the town learned what had happened. The Whitmore women had made a fool of him, and by morning everyone would know it. He stormed down the hallway and pounded on Mrs. Whitmore's door. It opened to reveal both women in their night clothes, Mrs. Whitmore imperious even in her dressing gown, Eloise pale and wide-eyed behind her. "Where is she?" Matthew demanded. "Mrs." Whitmore's face went white, then red. "What do you mean? She's with you." "She's run off, left through the window like a thief in the night." The older woman swayed, gripping the doorframe. "That stupid, stupid girl. She's ruined us all." Behind her, Eloise made a small sound of distress. Matthew's gaze fell on her, young, frightened, innocent of her sister's schemes, in her white nightgown with her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked even younger than her 19 years. What happened next? Matthew would later blame on rage and humiliation and the desperate need to salvage something from this disaster. But in that moment, staring at the two women who'd made a mockery of his attempt at matrimony, a wild idea seized him. The marriage was witnessed, he said slowly. "The whole town saw a Whitmore daughter wed me today." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" Matthew's gaze fixed on Eloise. "I'm saying I married a Whitmore daughter, and by God, I'll have a Whitmore wife. Her." He pointed at Eloise. "She'll do." Eloise gasped, shrinking back. "No, you can't mean—" "I can and I do." Matthew's voice was hard as iron. "Your sister made a fool of me, but I'll not leave here empty-handed. You'll marry me, tonight, now." "This is madness, Mrs." Whitmore protested. "You cannot simply—" "Can't I?" Matthew cut her off. "Your daughter signed a marriage contract. Your family took my bride price. Would you prefer I demand satisfaction through the law? Drag your family name through every court and newspaper from here to Boston?" The threat hung in the air like a loaded gun. They all knew what scandal would mean for the Whitmores. They were hanging on to respectability by a thread as it was. Eloise stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered. "I can't. I'm still in mourning. Samuel—" "Samuel is dead," Matthew said brutally. "Too angry to be kind. And you'll be on the street if your family's reputation is ruined. Choose, Miss Eloise. Marriage to me or destitution for all of you." It was cruel. What he was doing. He knew it even as the words left his mouth, but the humiliation burned so hot he couldn't stop himself. He'd been prepared to honor the bargain, to be a good husband to a woman who clearly despised him, and she'd thrown it in his face. Mrs. Whitmore looked between Matthew and her younger daughter, calculation replacing shock in her eyes. "Eloise," she said sharply. "Mr. Hale is right. We must salvage what we can from Clarissa's disgrace." "Mother, no. Silence." The older woman's voice cracked like a whip. "You will do your duty to this family. Put on your sister's dress. We're going to the Reverend's house." And so, in the dead of night, still crying silent tears, Eloise Whitmore was hastily buttoned into her sister's abandoned wedding gown. It hung loose on her slighter frame, the hem dragging in the dust as they made their grim procession to Reverend Thompson's house. The minister, roused from sleep, looked between them in confusion and growing alarm. "Mr. Hale, what is the meaning of this? My bride has fled." Matthew said flatly. "I'm taking her sister instead. You'll perform the ceremony." "This is highly irregular." "You'll do it," Matthew interrupted. "Or I'll make sure everyone from here to Denver knows how the Whitmore family honors their agreements." Whether from fear of scandal or pity for the weeping girl in the too large dress, Reverend Thompson reluctantly agreed. In his small parlor, by the light of a single lamp, Matthew Hale and Eloise Whitmore were bound in matrimony, where Clarissa had been cold and rigid. Eloise was limp with shock. She whispered her vows through tears, flinching when Matthew took her hand to place the ring, the same ring he'd put on her sister's finger hours before. When told to kiss his bride, Matthew merely pressed his lips briefly to her forehead. She was shaking like a leaf in a storm. As they signed the register, Matthew noticed Eloise's hand trembling so badly she could barely hold the pen. For the first time since finding the empty room, he felt a flicker of shame. This wasn't the girl's fault. She was as much a victim of her sister's selfishness as he was. But it was too late for regrets. The deed was done. Eloise Whitmore, shy, grieving Eloise, who still wore mourning for her dead soldier, was now Mrs. Matthew Hale. As they left the Reverend's house, Eloise stumbled, and Matthew caught her arm. She looked up at him with those dark, sorrow-filled eyes, and he saw his own trapped misery reflected there. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though what she was apologizing for, he couldn't say. He didn't answer. What was there to say? They were bound now, two strangers tied together by desperation and duty, heading into a future neither had chosen. The stars above Redemption Creek looked on, cold and distant, as Matthew Hale took his reluctant bride home to begin their life together, a life built on humiliation, coercion, and the ashes of what might have been. The wagon ride to Matthew's ranch passed in absolute silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Eloise sat as far from her new husband as the bench would allow, still wearing Clarissa's wedding dress that pooled around her like spilled milk. Her tears had dried, leaving salt tracks on her pale cheeks, but her eyes remained fixed on her clasped hands as if they held answers to impossible questions. Matthew drove with grim determination, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The events of the night felt surreal. In the span of hours, he'd gone from marrying one sister to another, from anticipated partnership to forced union. Beside him, this slip of a girl in mourning was now his wife. The thought sat heavy and uncomfortable, like wearing another man's boots. The Hale Ranch emerged from the darkness like a ship from fog, a two-story wooden house standing solitary against the vast emptiness of the range. No flowers softened its harsh lines. No curtains gentled its windows. It was a man's place through and through, built for function over comfort. Matthew pulled the wagon to a stop before the front porch. He climbed down and turned to help Eloise, but she was already gathering the voluminous skirts, trying to manage the descent alone. Her foot caught in the hem and she stumbled. Instinctively, Matthew caught her waist, steadying her. She went rigid at his touch, and he released her immediately as if burned. "Thank you," she whispered, not meeting his eyes. He led her inside, lighting a lamp that cast dancing shadows across the sparse furnishings. Everything was clean but austere. A horsehair sofa, two ladder-back chairs, a simple table. No pictures adorned the walls, no feminine touches softened the space. It looked exactly like what it was, the home of a man who'd never expected to share it. Eloise stood in the middle of the room like a lost child, the oversized dress making her appear even smaller. Matthew cleared his throat, uncomfortable with her obvious distress but unsure how to address it. "The bedroom's upstairs," he said gruffly. "First door on the right. There's water in the pitcher for washing." She nodded without looking at him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears and expectations. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight," Matthew added abruptly. "Give you time to settle." For the first time since leaving town, Eloise looked directly at him. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was harder than he intended. "This isn't what either of us planned. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." He grabbed a blanket from a chest and headed for the door, pausing at the threshold. "There's bread in the kitchen if you're hungry, and the well's out back if you need more water." Then he was gone, leaving Eloise alone in the unfamiliar house. She heard his footsteps fade toward the barn, and only then did she allow herself to collapse onto a chair, the wedding dress billowing around her like a white sea. The next morning dawned gray and dusty, with wind rattling the windows. Eloise woke disoriented in the big bed, still wearing her chemise, having been unable to face putting on either the wedding dress or her own mourning clothes. She lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sounds, cattle lowing in the distance, a rooster's crow, the steady bang of something metal in the wind. Downstairs, she found evidence that Matthew had already been and gone, muddy boot prints across the floor, the coffee pot still warm on the stove. Through the kitchen window, she could see him in the distance, working with the cattle, even from here. She could sense the tension in his movements, the anger he was working out through physical labor. Eloise looked around the kitchen, sparse like the rest of the house, but clean. A few dishes, basic supplies, everything functional and nothing more. No woman had tended this space in a long time, if ever. Without conscious decision, she began to move. First heating water to wash the dishes in the sink, then sweeping the muddy tracks from the floor. She found her trunk had been brought in during the night and left by the door. From it, she retrieved one of her plain black dresses, mourning attire that now seemed appropriate for more than just Samuel's memory. By the time Matthew returned for the midday meal, she had bread baking in the oven and a simple stew bubbling on the stove. He stopped in the doorway, clearly surprised to find her working. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I do, though." Eloise kept her back to him, stirring the pot. "I may not be the bride you bargained for, Mr. Hale, but I won't be a burden. I know how to keep house." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd left, but when she turned, he was still there, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Matthew," he said finally. You should call me Matthew." She nodded, returning to her cooking. "The stew will be ready soon, Matthew." They ate in silence at the simple table, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the ever-present wind outside. Eloise noticed how he ate mechanically, tasting nothing, his mind clearly elsewhere. When he finished, he rose without a word. "Thank you for the meal," he said stiffly, then added, "I'll be working the north pasture this afternoon. If you need anything." "I'll be fine," Eloise assured him quietly. And so began their pattern. Days passed in careful avoidance, polite distance, and minimal conversation. Matthew left early each morning, returning only for meals that Eloise prepared without fail. She took over the household duties without being asked, cooking, cleaning, mending his clothes that she found in a pile by the wash basin. At night, Matthew continued to sleep in the barn, despite Eloise's quiet protest that she could take the smaller room down the hall. "It's not proper," he'd said gruffly, ending the discussion. The town's gossip reached them even in their isolation. When Matthew went for supplies, he returned tight-lipped and shorter-tempered than usual. Eloise could imagine what was being said. How Matthew Hale had been jilted and took the younger sister as compensation. How poor little Eloise had been forced into marriage while still mourning her dead soldier. All of it true, which somehow made it worse. Mrs. Whitmore visited once, a week after the wedding. She arrived in a hired buggy, dressed for travel. "I'm returning to Boston," she announced, sitting ramrod straight in the parlor while Eloise served tea with trembling hands. "My cousin has agreed to take me in, despite the circumstances." "What about Clarissa?" Eloise asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Her mother's face hardened. "That ungrateful girl is no daughter of mine. She made her choice when she ran off with that gambler. I'm told they were seen in Denver, living in sin and scandal." She fixed Eloise with a stern gaze. "You, at least, did your duty. See that you continue to do so." After she left, Eloise stood at the window watching the buggy disappear into the dust. She was truly alone now. No family, no friends. Only a husband who could barely look at her, and a house that felt more like a prison with each passing day. That night, she found Matthew sitting on the porch, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. She'd never seen him drink before. He looked up at her approach, his eyes slightly unfocused. "Your mother's gone. Then?" he asked. "Yes." Eloise hesitated, then sat on the other chair, keeping distance between them. "She won't be back." Matthew took another swig from the bottle. "Good riddance. Woman sold both her daughters like cattle." "She was trying to save us," Eloise said softly, though the words felt hollow. "After father's debts." "Save you?" Matthew's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you call this? Being forced to marry your sister's cast-off?" Eloise flinched as if slapped. "I didn't ask for this any more than you did." "No, but you're here, aren't you? Playing house, cooking and cleaning like a proper wife." His voice was slurred, angry. "Do you think that makes up for it? Do you think I don't see her every time I look at you?" Tears burned her eyes, but Eloise refused to let them fall. "I know what I am to you, Matthew, a consolation prize, a substitute." "But I'm trying—" "Don't!" He stood abruptly, swaying slightly. "Don't try! Don't! Just don't!" He stumbled off toward the barn, leaving Eloise alone on the porch. She sat there until full dark, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, wondering if Clarissa had any idea what destruction she'd left in her wake. The next morning, Matthew appeared hollow-eyed and shame-faced. "I apologize for last night," he said stiffly. "The whiskey, I spoke out of turn." "You spoke the truth," Eloise replied quietly, setting his breakfast before him. "We both know what this is." He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. They returned to their careful dance of avoidance, but something had shifted. The pretense was gone, leaving only the raw reality of their situation. Eloise threw herself into work, beyond the house. She began tending the kitchen garden that had long gone to seed. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, learned the rhythms of ranch life. Her soft hands grew calloused, her pale skin browned from the sun. She discovered that exhaustion helped her sleep without dreaming of Samuel or crying for the life she'd lost. One afternoon, she ventured to the stable and found a mare with a badly infected cut on her foreleg. The horse was skittish, rolling her eyes and pulling against her tether. Eloise had helped tend horses back in Boston, before everything fell apart. Carefully, speaking softly, she approached the injured animal. That's how Matthew found her an hour later, kneeling in the straw, carefully cleaning the wound while the mare stood docile under her touch. "What are you doing?" He sounded more surprised than angry. "She's hurt," Eloise said without looking up. "The cut's gone bad. It needs cleaning and bandaging or she'll go lame." Matthew watched as she worked, her movements sure and gentle. "Where did you learn that?" "Father kept horses before—" She trailed off. "Before the debts, before the disgrace, before everything crumbled. I used to help the groom sometimes." When she finished, the mare nuzzled her shoulder, leaving dusty marks on the black dress. Eloise smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed her face for just a moment. "Thank you," Matthew said quietly. "That's Buttercup. She was my mother's horse." It was the first personal thing he'd told her. Eloise looked up at him, seeing for a moment not the angry, trapped man, but someone else, someone who'd lost things too. "She's beautiful," she said simply. They stood there in the dusty barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, and for just a moment, the weight between them seemed to ease. Then Matthew cleared his throat, and the moment passed. "I should get back to work," he muttered, turning away. But that night, for the first time, he knocked on the bedroom door. When Eloise opened it, confused and slightly afraid, he held out a small jar. "For your hands," he said gruffly. "The lye soap and work. It's hard on city skin." It was salve, the kind ranch hands used. Eloise took it, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and turned to go, then paused. I'll start taking my meals in the house regular-like, if that's acceptable. Of course, you shouldn't have to eat in the barn. This is your home. Our home, he corrected quietly, then walked away before she could respond. That night, Eloise sat on the bed they'd never shared, smoothing the salve into her work-roughened hands. It smelled of herbs and tallow, practical and unfancy, like everything about Matthew. She thought about the way he'd looked at her in the barn, like he was seeing her for the first time. Outside, she could hear him settling the horses for the night, his low voice carrying on the wind. They were strangers still, bound by duty and circumstance rather than choice. But maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to remain enemies. The moon rose over the ranch, casting silver light across the hard land. In the big house, Eloise prepared for another night of sleeping alone, while in the barn, Matthew lay awake on his makeshift bed, wondering how long he could maintain this distance from the woman who was his wife in name only. Neither of them could have guessed how soon circumstances would force them closer, or how the wild, unforgiving land would test the fragile understanding beginning to grow between them. The drought deepened as September crawled toward October, turning the landscape into a hellscape of cracked earth and withering grass. Each day, Matthew watched his cattle grow thinner, their ribs beginning to show through their hides like bars on a prison. The few waterholes that remained were muddy wallows fought over by desperate animals. Eloise had taken to rising before dawn, helping him load the water wagon for the endless trips to the distant creek that still ran, though barely. She never complained about the early hours or the back-breaking work of hauling buckets, though Matthew could see the toll it took in the slump of her shoulders each evening. One morning, they found 3 steers dead near the north pasture, victims of the heat and lack of water. Matthew stood over the carcasses, his face grim as vultures circled overhead. "We'll have to burn them," he said flatly. "Can't risk disease spreading to the others?" Eloise nodded, already moving to help gather brush for the pyre. As they worked side by side in the rising heat, Matthew found himself stealing glances at her. The delicate Eastern lady was gone, replaced by a woman who could haul water, tend wounds, and face the harsh realities of ranch life without flinching. Her morning dress was faded now, patched in places, the hem torn from catching on brush and rocks. That night, a sandstorm rolled in from the west, turning the air yellow-brown and sending grit through every crack in the house. Matthew rushed in from securing the livestock, finding Eloise struggling to close the shutters against the howling wind. "Get away from the windows!" he shouted over the storm's roar, pulling her back as a branch crashed against the glass. They worked together to secure the house, stuffing rags under doors, covering what they could. When the worst of it hit, they huddled in the kitchen, the safest room with its solid walls and no windows. The lamp flickered as the house groaned under the assault of wind and sand. "Will the animals be all right?" Eloise asked, having to raise her voice to be heard. "They know to find shelter," Matthew assured her, though worry etched lines around his eyes. Nothing to do now but wait it out. The storm raged for hours. They sat at the kitchen table, playing cards by lamplight to pass the time and distract from the violence outside. Matthew was surprised to find Eloise knew several games, including poker. "Samuel taught me," she explained, dealing another hand. "Said a soldier's wife should know how to bluff." Her voice caught slightly on his name, but she continued dealing. As the night wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, exhaustion began to claim them both. Eloise's head started to droop, jerking upright each time she caught herself falling asleep. "You should rest," Matthew said. "I couldn't sleep through this racket," she protested, even as her eyes struggled to stay open. Another fierce gust shook the house, and without thinking, Matthew moved his chair closer to hers. "Here," he said gruffly. "Lean on me if you need to. No sense being uncomfortable on top of everything else." Eloise hesitated, then exhaustion won. She let her head rest against his shoulder, her weight slight but warm against his side. Matthew went very still, acutely aware of her presence, the soft sound of her breathing. the faint scent of soap and sunshine in her hair despite the dust. When the storm finally passed near dawn, they were both asleep at the table. Eloise curled against Matthew's side, his arm having somehow found its way around her shoulders in the night. They woke with the first light filtering through the cracks, both pulling apart quickly, not meeting each other's eyes. The damage outside was extensive. Fences down. The chicken coop partially collapsed. Equipment scattered across the yard, but worse was yet to come. Buttercup, the mare that had been Matthew's mother's, was down in her stall, her legs tangled in broken boards from the storm. "Easy, girl, easy," Matthew soothed, but his face was grave as he examined her. The leg Eloise had treated weeks before was re-injured, and worse. Her right foreleg showed an ugly break. "Can you set it?" Eloise asked, kneeling beside him in the straw. Matthew's jaw tightened. "Horses don't heal from breaks like this. The kindest thing." He pulled his pistol from his holster, checking the chambers. "No!" Eloise caught his arm. "Please, let me try. I've seen it done. With splints and—" "It's cruel to let her suffer," Matthew said harshly. "This is ranch life. Eloise, sometimes the kind thing is the hard thing." But looking at her face, determined, pleading, he found himself hesitating. This horse was one of his last links to his mother, and here was his unwanted wife fighting to save her. "1 week," he said finally. "If she's not improving by then, I do what needs doing." Eloise nodded quickly, already moving to fashion splints from broken fence posts. For the next days, she barely left the barn, changing poultices, adjusting supports, coaxing the mare to eat. Matthew would find her there at all hours, talking softly to Buttercup, her hands gentle and sure. On the 4th night, he brought out blankets and a lantern. "If you're going to sleep out here, at least be warm," he muttered. "Thank you." She looked up at him, exhaustion and determination warring in her face. "I know you think I'm foolish." "I think you're stubborn," he corrected, sitting down in the straw beside her. "But then, so am I." They sat in companionable silence, watching the mare's labored breathing. After a while, Eloise spoke softly. "Tell me about your mother." Matthew was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter. Father was never the same after. Turned hard, angry, blamed God, blamed the land, blamed me sometimes." He picked up a piece of straw, twisting it between his fingers. "She was the only gentle thing in his life. When she went, gentleness went with her. Is that why you never married? Before, I mean." He glanced at her. "Partly. Never saw much point in bringing a woman to this hard place. Then the bank started making threats, and—" He shrugged. "And you ended up with me instead of Clarissa." Eloise's voice was matter of fact. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she'd stayed?" Matthew considered this. "We'd have made each other miserable. She wanted things I couldn't give, excitement, society, a different life. You." "I what?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. Hair escaping from its pins, dress dirty from barn work, face thin from hard living but somehow more beautiful for its purpose. "You don't ask for what I can't give." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Buttercup shifted, breaking the spell, and they both turned their attention back to the injured mare. By the 6th day, miraculously, Buttercup was improving. She could put a little weight on the leg, was eating better. Matthew watched from the barn door as Eloise changed the dressings, talking to the horse in that low, sweet voice. "I'll be damned," he muttered. Then louder, "Looks like you were right." Eloise's smile was radiant. "She's a fighter, like her owner." "Like her doctor," Matthew corrected, and was rewarded with a blush that made something turn over in his chest. That night, a new crisis. Word came that wolves had been spotted near the remaining cattle, with most of his hands having quit due to unpaid wages. Matthew would have to stand watch alone. "I'll come with you," Eloise said immediately. "Absolutely not. Wolves are dangerous. So is leaving you out there alone." She was already reaching for her shawl. "I can shoot. Father taught me. This isn't target practice in a Boston garden. No, it's protecting what's ours." She met his gaze steadily. "Please, Matthew, let me help." The word ours stopped him short. When had she started thinking of the ranch as theirs instead of his? Against his better judgment, he found himself saddling 2 horses. They rode out as dusk fell, rifles across their saddles, to the small shack that served as a watch post. The cattle were restless, bunching together, sensing predators in the growing darkness. They took positions at opposite windows, watching the shadows lengthen across the plain. As full dark fell, they heard it, the lone howl that sent shivers down the spine, followed by answering calls from multiple directions. "They're circling," Matthew said quietly, testing for weakness. The first attack came just after midnight, dark shapes flowing like water through the grass, eyes reflecting green in the moonlight. Matthew fired, the crack of his rifle splitting the night. Beside him, Eloise's gun spoke a second later, her shot clean and true. The wolves retreated but didn't go far. They could hear them pacing, waiting. The cattle lowed nervously, pressing closer together. "You're a good shot," Matthew acknowledged, reloading. "I had a good teacher." Her voice was steady despite the situation. "Samuel used to say—" She stopped abruptly. "It's all right," Matthew said quietly. "You can talk about him. He was important to you." In the darkness, he heard her shift. "We were going to have a little farm in Ohio. Nothing grand, just peaceful, quiet. He promised we'd grow old together, sitting on the porch watching sunsets." Her voice was wistful but not bitter. "Funny how life never goes the way you plan." "No," Matthew agreed. "It doesn't." The wolves came again, bolder this time. The fight was fierce, guns firing, wolves snarling, cattle bellowing in fear. At one point, a large male made it past their fire, heading for a calf. Without thinking, Matthew left his position, putting himself between the wolf and its prey. The animal leaped, and he went down hard, rolling in the dirt as teeth snapped inches from his throat. A shot rang out, and the wolf went limp. Matthew looked up to see Eloise standing over them, rifle smoking, her face white but determined. "Are you hurt?" She dropped beside him, hands checking for wounds with surprising expertise. "I'm fine." He caught her hands, stilling their movement. "Eloise, that was... thank you." She looked at him, and suddenly the space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. They were both breathing hard, adrenaline singing through their veins, acutely aware of how close death had come. Her hands were still in his, warm and calloused now from work. "Matthew," she whispered, and he didn't know if it was warning or invitation. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then a howl in the distance broke the spell, reminding them of the danger still lurking. They pulled apart, returning to their posts. But something fundamental had shifted. The rest of the night passed without major incident. As dawn broke, they found 3 dead wolves and, miraculously, no lost cattle, riding back exhausted and filthy. They were quiet, each lost in thought about what had almost happened in that charged moment. Back at the ranch, as Eloise headed inside to start breakfast, Matthew caught her arm gently. "You did well last night, better than well. I'm glad you were there." She looked up at him, something soft in her expression. "We make a good team." "Yes," he agreed, his voice rough. "We do." As she disappeared into the house, Matthew stood in the yard, watching the sun rise over his land. Their land. He thought about her fierce protection of Buttercup, her steady aim in the darkness, the way she'd looked at him with the wolf dead at their feet. His marriage might have begun in anger and obligation, but something else was growing now in the harsh soil of necessity and shared struggle. Something that felt dangerously like affection, possibly even more, inside. Eloise put the coffee on with shaking hands, her heart still racing from more than just the night's dangers. The way Matthew had looked at her, the way her name sounded in his voice, everything was changing, and she didn't know whether to run toward it or away. But as she heard his boots on the porch, coming in for breakfast like he did every morning now, she knew there was no running. They were bound together, for better or worse. And maybe, just maybe, it was beginning to be for better. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October, carried by a dust-covered rider who didn't wait for a reply. Matthew found it tucked under a rock on the porch when he came in for the midday meal. His name scrawled across the envelope in handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside, Eloise was setting out plates, humming softly, something she'd started doing recently that never failed to catch him off guard with its simple domesticity. She looked up at his entrance, her welcoming smile faltering at his expression. "What is it?" she asked. Matthew opened the letter, scanning its contents. His face went hard as stone. "It's from the sheriff in Denver. Clarissa's been arrested." Eloise's hand went to her throat. "Arrested? For what?" "Fraud. Cheating at cards. Apparently, her companion abandoned her when the law caught up." He crumpled the letter in his fist. "The sheriff says she's been asking for family, asking for her husband." The word hung between them like a blade. Husband. Technically, legally. That first ceremony had been binding, even if Clarissa had fled before consummating it. The hasty second ceremony with Eloise had been born of anger and desperation. Its legitimacy questionable at best if anyone cared to examine it closely. Eloise sank into a chair, her face pale. "What will you do?" "Nothing." Matthew's voice was flat. "She made her choice." "Matthew." "No." He slammed his hand on the table, making her jump. "She humiliated me, abandoned our marriage, ran off with another man. Now she faces consequences and suddenly remembers she has a husband." Eloise was quiet for a long moment. Then, "She's still my sister." The pain in her voice cut through his anger. Matthew looked at her, really looked at her. These past weeks had changed her, strengthened her. But underneath she was still the gentle soul who'd tried to save a broken horse, who'd stood beside him against wolves, who loved her undeserving sister despite everything. "You want me to help her?" It wasn't a question. "I know I have no right to ask." "You have every right." The words surprised them both. "You're my wife." "Am I?" Eloise's voice was barely a whisper. "Or am I just the replacement you took in anger? If Clarissa comes back—" Matthew crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her to her feet. "Don't!" His hands gripped her shoulders, perhaps too tightly. "Whatever else happens, you're not a replacement. Not anymore." They stood frozen, the air between them charged. Eloise's eyes searched his face, looking for truth. What she found there made her breath catch. "I'll go to Denver," Matthew said roughly, releasing her. "I'll pay her bail, give her money to go east, but that's all. She's not coming back here." "Thank you," Eloise breathed. He left the next morning, taking what little cash they had. Eloise watched him ride away, anxiety gnawing at her stomach. What if seeing Clarissa changed his mind? What if her beautiful, vivacious sister worked her charms? What if— She cut off the thoughts ruthlessly. There was work to be done, and worrying wouldn't change whatever was to come. The first day passed quietly. Eloise tended the animals, worked in the garden, tried to ignore the empty chair at dinner. That night, she found herself standing in the doorway of the bedroom Matthew had never shared with her, wondering if he'd ever truly be hers. The second day brought trouble. 3 men rode up to the house, rough-looking types with hard eyes and harder smiles. Eloise recognized the leader as Jake Morrison, a cattle buyer with a reputation for taking advantage of desperate ranchers. "Mrs. Hale." Morrison touched his hat mockingly. "Heard your husband's away." "He'll be back soon," Eloise said evenly, though her hand inched toward the rifle just inside the door. "That so? Heard he went to fetch his real wife from Denver." Morrison's smile was ugly. "Leaves you in a peculiar position, doesn't it? Not quite wife, not quite widow. State your business or leave," Eloise said coldly. "Business is simple. Hale owes money. Banks, suppliers, hands he couldn't pay. I'm willing to buy this place, settle those debts, give you enough left over to start fresh somewhere else." "The ranch isn't for sale." Morrison laughed. "Everything's for sale. Little lady, just a matter of price or pressure." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Be a shame if something happened while Hale's away. Accidents happen on ranches. Fires start. Cattle disappear. Are you threatening me?" "Warning you. This land's too much for a woman alone. Be smart. Take the offer." Eloise's chin lifted. "Get off our land. Now." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." After they left, Eloise's hands shook as she loaded both rifles and the shotgun. She barricaded the doors, checked every window. As darkness fell, every sound made her jump. She'd faced wolves with Matthew beside her, but this felt different, more malicious. Around midnight, she heard horses, multiple riders, trying to be quiet. Her heart hammered as she positioned herself by the front window, rifle ready. They were heading for the barn, for the animals. Without thinking, she burst out the back door, circling around. In the moonlight, she could see two men trying to lead Buttercup out while another worked on the cattle pen. Rage flooded through her. They wouldn't take what she and Matthew had fought so hard to save. The first shot was meant as a warning, kicking up dust near the horse thief's feet. "Next one won't miss," she shouted. The men scrambled for cover, returning fire. Eloise pressed against the side of the barn, heart racing. She was outnumbered, but she knew this land better now. Moving carefully, she worked her way to higher ground. From her new position, she had a clear shot. The rifle cracked, and one man yelped, clutching his shoulder. The others decided the fight wasn't worth it, mounting up and riding hard. As they fled, one shouted back, "This ain't over." Eloise stayed hidden until she was sure they were gone, then ran to check the animals. All safe, though agitated. It was only then, as the adrenaline faded, that she realized she was crying, from fear, relief, and fierce protectiveness of this harsh place that had become home. The next morning brought Matthew thundering into the yard, horse lathered with sweat. He swung down before the animal had fully stopped, catching Eloise as she ran from the house and pulling her hard against him. "I heard in town," he said roughly into her hair, "about Morrison's men, that you drove them off alone." "I'm fine," she assured him, though she clung just as tightly. "They were after the stock. I couldn't let them." He pulled back to look at her, hands framing her face. "You could have been killed. So could you. Any day. This is our life, isn't it? Fighting for what's ours?" "Ours," he repeated, something fierce in his eyes. "Yes." The moment stretched, weighted with unspoken things. Then Eloise remembered. "Clarissa?" Matthew's expression shuddered. "Paid her bail. Gave her stage fare east. She's gone." Did you?" She tried. His voice was flat. Cried, pleaded, promised she'd be a proper wife this time. When that didn't work, she tried other methods. His jaw tightened. "I told her I already had a wife. The only one I want." Eloise's breath caught. "Matthew." She laughed, said you were always the mouse, hiding in corners. Said I'd tire of you within a month. His hands tightened on her arms. "She doesn't know you at all. The woman who saved Buttercup, who fought wolves, who stood alone against horse thieves. You're no mouse. You're magnificent." Before she could respond, his mouth was on hers. Not the brief, dutiful peck from their wedding, but something desperate and hungry. Eloise made a soft sound, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, weeks of tension and unacknowledged want pouring out. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that sooner," he said roughly. "Yes," Eloise agreed, surprising a laugh from him. "You should have." But even as they stood there, holding each other in the morning sun, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Clarissa's arrest, Morrison's threats, the weight of their questionable marriage, it all pressed down like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. That evening, as they sat together on the porch for the first time as something more than strangers, Matthew told her about Denver, About Clarissa's tears that seemed calculated, her promises that rang hollow, her fury when she realized he wouldn't bend. She said something else, he admitted quietly. Said she'd make us pay for humiliating her, that the whole territory would know what we did, how I took her sister before the sheets were cold. Eloise's hand found his. Let them talk. We know the truth. Do we? Matthew turned to her. Eloise, what we did, what I forced, you didn't force me to stay, she interrupted. These weeks since, I could have left. Instead, I chose to fight for this place. For us. She met his gaze steadily. I choose you. Matthew, not because I have to anymore, but because I want to. He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less meaningful. When they pulled apart, he stood, offering his hand. Come inside? She understood what he was asking. To truly begin their marriage, to close the door on the past and face whatever came as husband and wife in truth. Not just name. Without hesitation, she took his hand. That night, as autumn wind rattled the windows, they lay entwined in the bed they now shared. Matthew traced lazy patterns on Eloise's bare shoulder, marveling at how different this felt from what he'd expected marriage to be. I was going to court her properly, he said into the darkness. Clarissa had it all planned. Flowers, presents, calling on Sundays. Then the bank threatened foreclosure and everything became rushed. And you ended up with the wrong sister, Eloise said lightly, though he heard the question underneath. He turned her to face him. No, I ended up exactly where I was meant to be. Just took the long way getting here. She kissed him then, sweet and sure. And he knew whatever storms were coming. Morrison's threats. Clarissa's promised revenge. The gossiping tongues of the territory. They'd weather them together. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain to break the drought. But in the house that had become a home, two people who'd found each other through loss and hardship held tight, building something worth fighting for in the unforgiving land. The rains finally came in November, breaking the drought in great torrents that turned the cracked earth to mud and brought the grass back to life. With the rain came a different kind of storm. Clarissa's return to Redemption Creek. She arrived on the afternoon stage, dressed in black silk that emphasized her pale beauty, playing the role of wronged wife to perfection. By evening, half the town was buzzing with her version of events. How Matthew had forced her innocent sister into an unholy union while she, the true Mrs. Hale, had been kidnapped by bandits on her wedding night. Lies, Matthew spat when he heard, pacing their kitchen like a caged wolf. She's spinning tales to turn the town against us. Eloise stood by the window, watching storm clouds gather. These past weeks had been the happiest of her life, working beside Matthew by day, lying in his arms at night, building something real and lasting. Now it felt fragile as spun glass. We knew this might happen, she said quietly. Knowing and living it are different things. He moved behind her, arms circling her waist, pulling her back against his chest. I won't let her destroy what we have. The law might not give you a choice. Eloise turned in his arms, searching his face. If she challenges our marriage, then we fight. His kiss was fierce, possessive. You're my wife, Eloise. In every way that matters. But the damage was already spreading. The next morning, Reverend Thompson arrived, grave-faced and reluctant. I've been asked to look into the irregularities of your marriage, he said, not meeting their eyes. Mrs. Clarissa Hale has petitioned the church council. She's not Mrs. Hale. Matthew growled. That's what we must determine. The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. There are questions about the legitimacy of the second ceremony, performed under duress, while a prior union remained unconsummated but valid. Eloise felt the blood drain from her face. What are you saying? I'm saying the church may need to annul your marriage to Mr. Hale, and if that happens, the law will follow suit. After he left, they stood in stunned silence. Finally, Eloise spoke. I should leave, before this gets worse. No, Matthew's response was immediate, vehement. "We run now. We're admitting guilt. We stand and fight." Fight with what? She has the law, the church, society's expectations. We have the truth. He gripped her shoulders. And we have each other. That has to count for something. The hearing was set for the following week. In the meantime, the town divided into camps. Those who believed Clarissa's tale of kidnapping and coercion, and those who'd seen Matthew and Eloise work side by side these past months, building a real marriage from an impossible beginning. Jake Morrison, still smarting from Eloise driving off his men, threw his support behind Clarissa. "Always knew there was something off about that union," he declared loudly in the saloon. "A man taking his bride's sister the very same night? Scandalous." But others spoke up too. Mrs. Patterson from the general store told how Eloise had nursed her sick grandson when fever swept through town. Tom Rodriguez mentioned seeing the couple fighting wolves together, working as one. Old Pete the blacksmith grumbled that any fool could see those two were meant for each other. Through it all, Matthew and Eloise continued their daily routines, refusing to hide. But at night, the strain showed. They clung to each other in the darkness, memorizing touch and taste and whispered promises. "Whatever happens," Matthew said one night, rain drumming on the roof, "know that you're the only woman I've ever loved, will ever love." "Don't talk like that," Eloise whispered against his throat. "Like we're already lost." "We're not lost, just wanting you to know, in case I don't get another chance to say it proper." She silenced him with kisses, and they made love with desperate tenderness, as if they could hold back the world with the force of their connection. The night before the hearing, unable to sleep, Eloise slipped out to the barn. Buttercup nickered softly in greeting, and she leaned against the mare's warm side, drawing comfort from the steady heartbeat. "We saved you," she whispered to the horse. "Maybe there's hope for us too." She heard footsteps and turned to find Matthew watching her, his face shadowed in the lantern light. "Couldn't sleep either. I keep thinking about Samuel," she admitted. "How I mourned him. Truly. But what I feel for you, it's different, deeper, like I was sleeping my whole life until you woke me up." He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "You woke me too, showed me there was more to life than duty and survival." His voice roughened. "If they take you from me, they won't." She pulled back to meet his eyes, fierce determination in her gaze. "I won't let them. We've fought drought and storms and wolves. We can fight this too." The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear. The church was packed, townsfolk treating it like entertainment. Clarissa sat in the front row, perfectly composed, every inch the wronged woman. She'd found allies, Morrison chief among them, who'd coached her on her story. Matthew and Eloise entered together, hands clasped, heads high. They'd dressed carefully, he in his best suit, she in a simple but elegant dress she'd remade from one of her mother's old gowns. They looked like what they were, a united couple facing adversity together. Reverend Thompson called the hearing to order, clearly uncomfortable with the spectacle. "We're here to determine the validity of the marriage between Matthew Hale and Eloise Whitmore, performed on the night of August 15th, 1883. Clarissa rose gracefully. That ceremony was invalid. I am Mr. Hale's legal wife, married that very afternoon. What happened that night was abduction of my sister and forced marriage under duress." "You fled your marriage bed," Matthew stated flatly. "Ran off with Miguel Santos, leaving only a note." "I was taken against my will." Clarissa's voice broke artfully. "Mr. Santos threatened my life if I didn't come. I've been trying to return to my rightful husband ever since. Funny how that return coincided with Santos abandoning you and your arrest for fraud," Eloise said quietly. Clarissa's composure slipped for a moment, eyes flashing. "My difficulties in Denver have no bearing on the fact that my sister was forced into an illegal marriage while I was unable to protect her." The arguments went back and forth. Witnesses were called, some supporting Clarissa's version, others testifying to the reality of Matthew and Eloise's marriage. Through it all, the couple sat close together, drawing strength from each other's presence. Then Clarissa played what she clearly thought was her winning card. "I have here a letter," she announced, producing a paper with a flourish. "Written by my dear sister just days after the supposed marriage. Would you like to hear what she says about being forced?" Eloise went very still. She remembered that letter, written to a cousin back east in a moment of despair, before everything changed, before she fell in love with Matthew. Clarissa read with dramatic emphasis, "I am trapped in a marriage I did not choose, bound to a man who took me in anger as replacement for the sister he truly wanted. I pray each night for deliverance from this fate." The crowd murmured. Matthew's jaw clenched, but he kept hold of Eloise's hand. "That was before," Eloise said clearly, standing. "Before I knew him? Before we built a life together? Yes, our beginning was wrong, but what grew from it is right and true and worth fighting for." "Pretty words," Clarissa sneered. "But they don't change the facts. You're living in sin with my husband." "He was never your husband." Eloise's composure finally cracked. "You left him, humiliated him, broke the vows you'd just made. You want to talk about sin? Look in a mirror." "Enough," Reverend Thompson called for order. "This is a church, not a courtroom drama." But Eloise wasn't finished. "You want the truth? Yes, I was frightened that night. Yes, I wrote those words. But every day since, I've chosen to stay. Chosen to work beside him, fight beside him, love him. That's what marriage is, not words spoken in a ceremony, but the choice you make every morning to face the world together." She turned to address the packed church. "You've all seen us these months. You know what we've built. Can any of you truly say that what Clarissa abandoned and what Matthew and I have created are the same thing?" Old Pete stood up in the back. "Girl's got a point. I've seen marriage in name and marriage in truth. These two have the truth of it." "The law doesn't care about truth," Morrison interjected. "It cares about proper procedure." "Then the law's an ass," someone else called out, earning a scandalized gasp from some and nods from others. As the church erupted in debate, Matthew stood, pulling Eloise back to his side. "Enough," he said, voice carrying over the noise. "Reverend, church council, make your decision. But know this, whatever you decide about papers and ceremonies, Eloise is my wife. If you say otherwise, we'll leave this place and make our lives elsewhere. But we'll do it together." Clarissa's face went white with rage. "You can't. I can, and I will." He faced her fully. "You had your chance. You threw it away. Now you want to destroy what we've built from spite? I won't allow it. The law can go hang. I choose Eloise. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. That's my final word on it." The church went silent, all eyes on Reverend Thompson. The elderly minister looked between the three of them, Clarissa in her calculated distress, Matthew and Eloise standing as one. Finally, he spoke. "The church's position is complicated. Legally, the first marriage may have standing, but—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. "But I've spent my life shepherding souls, and I know love when I see it. I know commitment, sacrifice, partnership." He looked at Matthew and Eloise. "I see those things in you." "Reverend," Clarissa protested. He held up a hand. "However, this is beyond my authority alone. The matter must go before the territorial judge. Until then," he took a deep breath, "I recommend Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Hale continue as they have been, pending final legal determination." The explosion of voices was deafening. Clarissa stormed out, Morrison and her other allies trailing behind. Townsfolk argued among themselves, some outraged, others supportive. Through it all, Matthew and Eloise stood quietly, hands clasped, facing whatever came next together. They'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. Still, as they walked from the church into the cold November sun, Eloise felt a fierce hope. "She won't stop," she said quietly. "Neither will we," Matthew replied, bringing their joined hands to his lips. "Whatever comes, we face it together." That night, as they lay entwined in their bed. The future uncertain, but their commitment absolute. Eloise whispered, "I love you. Whatever name the law gives me, I'm your wife." "And I'm your husband," he replied, sealing the promise with a kiss that said more than any legal document ever could. Outside, winter winds howled, bringing the promise of hard months ahead. But inside their home, love had taken root too deep for any storm to destroy. The territorial judge wouldn't arrive until spring, leaving them in an agonizing limbo. Winter settled over Redemption Creek like a shroud, and with it came a coldness from the townspeople that cut deeper than any wind. Clarissa had taken rooms at the boarding house, holding court like an exiled queen, spinning her tales of wrongdoing to anyone who'd listen. Matthew threw himself into ranch work with fierce determination, as if he could hold their life together through sheer will. But Eloise saw the toll it took, the way his shoulders tensed when they rode to town, how his hand moved instinctively to his rifle when strangers approached. One gray December morning, Eloise woke feeling queasy. She barely made it to the wash basin before her stomach rebelled. Matthew was beside her instantly, holding her hair back, his face creased with worry. "Something you ate?" he asked when the worst had passed. She shook her head, a suspicion growing. "Matthew, when was my last monthly time?" His eyes widened as understanding dawned. They stared at each other, the implications enormous. A child. Now, with everything so uncertain? "Are you sure?" "Not yet, but—" She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. "I think so." He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. "A baby," he whispered, wonder and fear warring in his voice. "What if the judge rules against us?" Eloise voiced what they were both thinking. "What if I have to leave? Our child will be loved." Matthew interrupted fiercely. "Whatever happens, we'll ensure that." They kept the pregnancy secret, though Eloise wondered how long before her changing body betrayed them. Each morning's sickness was hidden, each moment of dizziness explained away. It became another secret binding them together, another reason to fight. But Clarissa wasn't idle. 2 weeks before Christmas, disaster struck. Matthew returned from town, his face dark with fury. "Morrison bought our loans," he said without preamble. "Every debt, every IOU, he's calling them in. We have 30 days to pay in full or he takes the ranch." Eloise sank into a chair. "How much?" "More than we could raise in a year of good cattle prices." Matthew's fist slammed onto the table. "This is Clarissa's doing. She's trying to force us out." What do we do?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "We could run, tonight, take what we can carry. Head for California or Oregon. Start over where nobody knows us." "Leave everything we've built." "To keep you?" "Yes." He knelt before her, taking her hands. "I'd rather be a poor man with you than a rich one without you." Eloise's heart ached at his willingness to sacrifice everything. But as she looked around the kitchen, at the curtains she'd sewn, the preserves she'd put up, the home they'd made, she felt something harden inside her. "No," she said firmly. "This is our home, our child's home. We don't run. Then how do we fight? We have no money, no allies." "That's not true." She stood, pacing. "The Pattersons, the Rodriguezes, old Pete. There are people who support us, maybe together." But even as she said it, she knew it was hopeless. The good people of Redemption Creek were struggling too. None had the kind of money Morrison was demanding. That night, unable to sleep, Eloise slipped out to walk. The cold air cleared her head but not her heart. She found herself at the small cemetery on the hill, standing before a stone she'd never visited, Samuel Morrison, her lost fiancé. "I loved you," she whispered to the stone. "But it was a girl's love, all dreams and no substance. What I have with Matthew, it's different, real, tested by fire." Tears froze on her cheeks. "I'm carrying his child, Samuel, and I might lose everything. What do I do?" The wind whispered through the bare trees, offering no answers. But as she turned to go, her eye caught something. Morrison, meeting with someone in the shadows of the church. She crept closer, recognizing Clarissa's silhouette. "Want them destroyed?" Clarissa was saying, not just gone, ruined, humiliated like they humiliated me. The ranch will be mine in 30 days. Morrison replied, what more do you want? I want her to suffer. Can't you push harder? Make them leave sooner. Patience. Let them hope a little longer. It makes the fall harder. Eloise heard enough. She slipped away, mind racing. They needed to know their enemies were united against them. But more, they needed a miracle. The miracle came from an unexpected source. 3 days later, a stranger arrived, a well-dressed man with silver at his temples and kind eyes. He introduced himself as Thomas Ashford. From Denver, I'm looking for Mrs. Eloise Hale, he said, hat in hand. That's me, Eloise said carefully, aware this could be another trap. I have something for you. He produced an envelope. From your late fiancé's estate. Eloise's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a bank draft and a letter in Samuel's careful script. My dearest Eloise, she read aloud. Matthew beside her. If you're reading this, I didn't make it home. I've left instructions for my small inheritance to go to you to secure your future. Be happy, my dear girl. Live the life we couldn't have together. The bank draft was substantial, enough to pay Morrison with some left over. Eloise stared at it through tears. I don't understand, she said. Samuel had no money. His family was poor. He saved every penny of his soldiers' pay. Ashford explained. Invested it wisely. He spoke of you constantly. Wanted to ensure you were provided for. He paused. I apologize for the delay in finding you. Your change in circumstances made it challenging. After Ashford left, Matthew and Eloise sat in stunned silence. Finally, Matthew spoke. He loved you very much. Yes. Eloise touched the letter gently. And in his way, he's given us our future. She looked at Matthew. Is it wrong that I'm grateful? That I'm glad for this chance to save our life together? No. Matthew pulled her close. I think he'd be glad too, to know you're loved, protected, fighting for your happiness. They paid Morrison the next day, the shock on his face almost worth the months of fear. Clarissa's reaction was more dramatic. She flew into a rage that had her thrown out of the boarding house, screaming about unfairness and revenge. But their relief was short-lived. A week later, Eloise woke to find blood staining the sheets. The cramps that followed told their own terrible story. No, 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 she whispered, even as Matthew ran for the doctor. Doctor. Garrett was gentle but direct. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale, these things happen, especially with first pregnancies. There's nothing you did wrong. Eloise lay in bed for days after, silent and withdrawn. Matthew tended her carefully, but she saw his own grief in the slump of his shoulders, the new lines around his eyes. They'd lost something precious before they'd even had a chance to truly celebrate it. Maybe it's a sign, she said one night, staring at the ceiling. Maybe we're not meant— Don't! Matthew's voice was rough. Don't you dare. This changes nothing about us. Doesn't it? We're living in uncertainty, fighting for a marriage that might not even be legal. He turned her to face him. Listen to me. Legal or not, blessed or not, you're my wife, the only one I'll ever want. We've lost this child. Yes, but we haven't lost each other. Don't let grief make you forget that. She broke then, sobbing against his chest while he held her, his own tears silent in the darkness. They grieved together for the child that wouldn't be, for the innocence lost, for the unfairness of it all. But come morning, they rose together. There was work to be done, a life to be lived, a fight still to be won. Eloise moved slowly, carefully. But she moved, and Matthew was there, steady as the mountains, ready to catch her if she faltered. Clarissa made one last attempt, arriving at the ranch with a proposal. Leave, she said simply. Both of you. I'll drop all claims if you just disappear. Give me the satisfaction of winning, and you can have each other. Eloise and Matthew exchanged looks. For a moment, just a moment, it was tempting to start fresh somewhere new, free of all this pain and complication. But then Eloise thought of Samuel's sacrifice, of the child they'd lost, of every sunrise she'd watched from this porch with Matthew beside her. "No," she said quietly. "This is our home. We've bled for it, fought for it, grieved within its walls. You can't have it. The judge will decide what he decides." Matthew interrupted. "But until he arrives, you're just a bitter woman trying to claim what you threw away. Get off our land." Clarissa left, but her parting words chilled them. "You'll regret this, both of you." That night, as winter wind howled around the house, Matthew and Eloise sat before the fire. The cradle he'd begun making sat in the corner, unfinished, a painful reminder. But there was peace, too, in their united front, in their refusal to break. "Spring will come," Eloise said softly. "The judge will come. We'll face whatever happens." "Together," Matthew agreed, kissing her temple. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in white. Inside, two wounded hearts began the slow work of healing, held together by love stronger than law, deeper than grief, and more enduring than any storm that might come. Spring came late that year, the snow lingering into March like an unwelcome guest. Eloise had slowly healed from her loss, though Matthew sometimes found her staring at nothing, her hand pressed unconsciously to her flat stomach. They didn't speak of trying again, not with their future still hanging in the balance. The territorial judge arrived on a mud-splattered Tuesday, his carriage struggling through the thawing roads. Judge Harrison Pike was a stern man with steel-gray whiskers and eyes that seemed to see through pretense. He set up court in the town hall, announcing he'd hear the case of Hale versus Hale the following Monday. That gave them 5 days. 5 days to prepare for a fight that would determine everything. "We need a lawyer," Matthew said that evening, poring over what few legal documents they had. "With what money?" Eloise asked gently. They'd paid their debts, but it had left them with little to spare. A knock at the door interrupted them. Matthew answered warily, hand near his gun, but relaxed, seeing Reverend Thompson on the porch. "Reverend," he greeted, stepping aside to let the elderly minister in. "Matthew, Eloise." Thompson looked older than his years, worn by the conflict in his congregation. "I've come to offer what help I can." He pulled out a worn leather journal. "I've been keeping records, you see, of every marriage I've performed, every circumstance surrounding them." He opened to a page, including notes about that night. Eloise leaned forward. "What kind of notes?" "The truth. That Mrs. Whitmore insisted on the marriage. That Miss Clarissa had already fled, abandoning her vows. That you, Eloise, tried to refuse but were given no choice by your mother." He met their eyes. "I should have spoken sooner, but I hoped it wouldn't come to this." "Will you testify?" Matthew asked. "If needed, but there's more." Thompson pulled out another paper. "I've been corresponding with church authorities in Denver about the validity of marriages performed under unusual circumstances." He showed them the letter. It spoke of intention being paramount in marriage, of mutual consent and continued cohabitation, establishing validity even when beginnings were irregular. "It's not definitive," Thompson warned, "but it may help." After he left, Eloise felt the first real spark of hope in months. "He's risking a lot, going against Clarissa and her supporters." "He's a good man," Matthew agreed, then pulled her close. "We might actually have a chance." But Clarissa wasn't idle. 2 days before the hearing, Eloise went to town for supplies and found her way blocked by Jake Morrison and 2 of his men. Mrs. Hale. Morrison drawled, mockery in the title. Or should I say, Miss Whitmore? "My name is Mrs. Hale," Eloise said evenly. "Now excuse me." "Not so fast." Morrison dismounted, standing too close. "Clarissa wants to make you one last offer. Leave now, tonight, and she'll ensure you get a generous settlement, enough to start over comfortable-like. And if I refuse," his smile was cold, "then things get unpleasant. See, we've found some interesting information about your late fiancé. Seems Samuel Morrison had some debts of his own, gambling debts, to some very dangerous people." Eloise's blood chilled. You're lying. Am I? Would be a shame if those debts somehow transferred to his beneficiary, if certain people in Denver learned where to find you. You're threatening me. Warning you. Take the offer, girl. It's more than you deserve. Eloise's mind raced. Even if he was lying about Samuel, the threat was clear. But running now would mean abandoning Matthew to face the hearing alone. I need time to think, she said. You have until tomorrow night. Morrison remounted. Be smart, girl. Some fights ain't worth winning. She rushed home, finding Matthew in the barn. When she told him about Morrison's threat, his face went dark with rage. I'll kill him, he snarled, reaching for his rifle. No! Eloise caught his arm. That's what they want, to provoke you into something that would ruin everything. Then what do? We find out if it's true about Samuel's debts. It hurt to even say it, to think her noble soldier might have had secrets. They rode to town together, seeking out old Pete, who knew everyone's business. The blacksmith listened to their questions, then spat tobacco juice. Sam Morrison was a good boy, he said firmly, straight as they come. If he owed money to anyone, it was the $5 he borrowed from me for train fare home. His eyes narrowed. Why are you asking? When they explained. Pete's face grew thunderous. That snake Morrison, making up lies about a dead hero. He thought for a moment. Wait here. He returned with a strongbox, pulling out papers. Sam left these with me before he went to war, for safekeeping. He handed them over. Look for yourselves. Boy kept records of every penny. The papers showed careful accounts, money saved, invested. No debts beyond the $5 to Pete. Relief flooded through Eloise. This proves Morrison's lying, Matthew said. About this, yes, Eloise agreed. But it doesn't mean he won't make trouble other ways. That night, they sat up late, planning. They had Reverend Thompson's testimony, character witnesses, proof of Morrison's lies. But would it be enough against Clarissa's manipulation and social expectations? Whatever happens, Matthews said as they finally went to bed. I want you to know something. These months with you have been the best of my life. If I had to do it all again, Clarissa running, the forced marriage, everything, I would. Because it brought me you. Eloise kissed him deeply. I love you too. Whatever tomorrow brings. They made love with desperate tenderness, as if storing up memories against potential separation. When they finally slept, it was wrapped in each other's arms, drawing strength for the battle ahead. Monday dawned clear and cold. The town hall was packed, everyone eager to witness the drama. Clarissa sat at the front in widow's black, a calculated choice that made Eloise's blood boil. She was playing the abandoned wife to perfection. Judge Pike called the proceedings to order. This is a hearing to determine the legal status of two claimed marriages. Mr. Hale, you may present your case. Matthew stood, shoulders square, without fancy words or legal knowledge. He told their story. Clarissa's abandonment, the desperation that led to the second marriage, how what began in anger had become real love. I don't claim what I did was right, he finished. But I claim that what grew from it is true. Eloise is my wife in every way that matters. Clarissa rose next, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She spun her tale of kidnapping, of being held against her will, of returning to find her sister trapped in an illegal union. I only want what's rightfully mine, she concluded. The marriage that was blessed by God and witnessed by this community. Mrs. Hale, the younger. Judge Pike addressed Eloise. Do you have anything to say? Eloise stood slowly. She'd prepared words, but looking at the judge's stern face, she spoke from the heart instead. Your Honor, I won't deny our beginning was wrong. I was forced into marriage while mourning another, while my sister's wedding dress still held her warmth. But, sir, life isn't always neat. Sometimes wrong beginnings lead to right endings. She looked at Matthew, drawing strength. I've stood beside this man through drought and storms. I've fought wolves with him, faced down thieves, buried our... Her voice caught. buried our hopes of a child. We've built a life together with our hands and hearts. If that's not marriage, then I don't know what is." The courtroom was silent. Then witnesses were called. Reverend Thompson testified to the circumstances of both ceremonies. Mrs. Patterson spoke of seeing the couple work together. Tom Rodriguez described the wolf attack, how they'd fought as one. Then Morrison took the stand for Clarissa, spinning lies about threats and coercion. But when Matthew's lawyer, a young man from the next town who'd taken the case for almost nothing, produced Samuel's papers, Morrison's credibility crumbled. "You lied about a dead war hero to threaten Mrs. Hale?" the lawyer pressed. Morrison's face flushed. "I was mistaken." "You were lying. What else have you lied about? Your business arrangement with Miss Clarissa, perhaps?" "Objection!" Clarissa shrieked, forgetting proper courtroom behavior. Judge Pike's gavel cracked. "Sit down, Madam, Mr. Morrison. Answer the question." Under pressure, Morrison admitted Clarissa had promised him favorable terms on the ranch if he helped her. The crowd murmured at this revelation of conspiracy. Finally, Judge Pike called for silence. "I've heard enough. This case presents a unique challenge to the law. By strict legal interpretation, the first marriage may have standing. However," Eloise gripped Matthew's hand so tight her knuckles went white. "However," Pike continued, "the law must also consider abandonment, conspiracy to defraud, and the sustained cohabitation of the second union. More importantly, the law serves justice, not technicality." He looked directly at Clarissa. "Madam, you abandoned your marriage vows within hours of making them. You've conspired to destroy your sister's life out of spite. You show no genuine desire for a union with Mr. Hale, only vengeance." Then to Matthew and Eloise. "While your union began improperly, you've demonstrated true commitment, mutual support, and genuine affection. In the eyes of this court," Eloise held her breath, "I declare the first marriage null by reason of abandonment and fraud. The second marriage, while irregular in its inception, is hereby recognized as legal and binding." The courtroom erupted. Clarissa screamed in rage, having to be restrained by the bailiff. Morrison slunk out, his schemes in ruins. But Eloise heard none of it. She was in Matthew's arms, both of them laughing and crying at once. "It's over," Matthew whispered against her hair. "You're mine, legally and truly." "I always was," she whispered back. They signed new papers that afternoon, making everything official. Clarissa left on the evening stage, vowing never to return. The ranch was theirs, their marriage recognized, their future finally clear. That night, in the bed they'd shared through uncertainty and sorrow, they celebrated with joy. And when, 2 months later, Eloise realized she was pregnant again, they felt it was a sign of new beginnings. "We'll name him Samuel if it's a boy," Matthew said, hand gentle on her still flat stomach, "to honor the man whose sacrifice saved us. And Hope if it's a girl." Eloise agreed, because that's what we never stopped having. Outside their window, the ranch stretched under starlight, the land they'd fought for, the home they'd built, the life they'd claimed against all odds. It had been a long, hard journey from that terrible night when a bride ran away and a marriage was forced. But sometimes, Eloise thought, the longest journeys lead to the sweetest destinations. In Matthew's arms, with their child growing beneath her heart and their future finally secure. She knew she was exactly where she belonged. 5 years had passed since Judge Pike's ruling, transforming the Hale Ranch from a struggling homestead into a thriving operation. The drought was a distant memory, replaced by seasons of plenty that had allowed them to expand their herd and hire reliable hands. But more than the land had flourished, Matthew and Eloise had built a life rich with love and purpose. Their son River was 4 now, with Matthew's steady gray eyes and Eloise's dark hair that caught the sun like polished mahogany. He was a solemn child, thoughtful beyond his years, often found talking earnestly to the horses or helping his mother in the garden with careful, pudgy hands. This particular morning found Eloise in the kitchen, flour dusting her apron as she prepared bread for the church social. Through the window, she watched Matthew teaching River to rope. The boy's face scrunched in concentration as he tried to mimic his father's fluid movements. "Like this, son." Matthew's patient voice carried on the breeze. "Easy does it. The rope's your partner, not your enemy." Eloise smiled, hand unconsciously moving to her rounded belly where their second child grew. This pregnancy had been easier, free from the shadows of uncertainty that had marked their early days. "Doctor," Garrett said everything looked fine, that come fall, River would have a sibling. A knock at the door interrupted her peaceful morning. Wiping her hands, she went to answer, finding Reverend Thompson on the porch. His hair had gone completely white in the intervening years, but his eyes were still kind. "Mrs. Hale," he greeted warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Never, Reverend. Please, come in. I'll put coffee on." They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she and Matthew had huddled during that long-ago sandstorm. So much had changed since then. "I've had a letter," Thompson said without preamble. "From Denver, about your sister." Eloise's hand stilled on her coffee cup. They'd heard nothing of Clarissa since she'd left in rage and humiliation. Is she all right?" "She's dying," Thompson said gently. "Consumption. Apparently. She's in a charity hospital and has been asking for you." The words hit Eloise like a physical blow. Despite everything, Clarissa was still her sister. "She wants to see me? The letter says she has something important to tell you. About your family. Your father." Eloise's mind raced. Their father had died in debt and disgrace, leaving them to their fate. What could Clarissa possibly have to say about him now? "I have to go," she said quietly. Thompson nodded. "I thought you might say that. Matthew won't like it." As if summoned, Matthew entered with River on his shoulders, both of them laughing. The laughter died seeing their faces. "What's happened?" Matthew asked. "Setting River down." The boy ran to his mother, sensing the tension. When Eloise explained, Matthew's face darkened. "Absolutely not. She's manipulating you, even now." "She's dying. Matthew." "So she says. How do we know it's not another scheme?" "Because Reverend Thompson wouldn't lie." Eloise stood, facing her husband. "I have to go. She's my sister, and if she dies with things unsaid between us, she tried to destroy us." "And she failed." Eloise touched his face gently. "We won. We have everything. Each other, River, the ranch, another baby coming. Can't we afford to show mercy?" Matthew struggled visibly, then pulled her against him. "You're too good for this world," he muttered into her hair. "Fine, but I'm coming with you." 3 days later, they left River with the Pattersons and took the stage to Denver. The city had grown since Eloise's desperate flight years before. Buildings stretching higher, streets busier with commerce and life. The charity hospital was a grim place, smelling of carbolic and despair. They found Clarissa in a ward with a dozen other dying women, her beauty ravaged by disease. She looked so small in the narrow bed, golden hair limp and lifeless. "Eloise," she whispered, eyes focusing with effort. "You came." "Of course I came." Eloise sat beside the bed, Matthew standing protectively behind her. Clarissa's gaze moved to him, still playing guard dog. "I see. Clarissa," Eloise warned quietly. "Please." Her sister closed her eyes. "I'm sorry. Old habits." She coughed, specks of blood on her handkerchief. "I don't have long. Need to tell you about father." "What about him?" "He didn't lose the money gambling." Clarissa's voice was barely audible. "He was blackmailed. Someone found out about his first family." Eloise went cold. "First family? In Ireland, before he came to America. A wife, children. He left them, started fresh in Boston, married mother without telling her." Clarissa wheezed. "Someone found out, threatened to expose him. He paid and paid until there was nothing left." The revelation reeled through Eloise's mind. Their proper father, so concerned with reputation, had been living a lie. Mother never knew? Never. He was going to tell her, but then he died, and Clarissa shrugged weakly. What was the point? But I knew. Found the letters after he died. Why didn't you tell me? Because I hated you. The words were said simply, without heat. You were always the good one. Sweet Eloise, who everyone loved, even dying. Samuel spoke of you, even Matthew, who was supposed to be mine, looked at you that night like he'd found something precious. Tears ran down Eloise's face. I never wanted, I know. Clarissa's hand found hers, cold and fragile. I know that now. Prison gives you time to think. Being sick gives you even more. She squeezed weakly. I wasted my life on jealousy and schemes. Don't waste yours on guilt. They sat in silence, years of hurt and anger dissolving into simple human connection. Finally, Clarissa spoke again. There's money. From Father's family in Ireland. They sent it after I wrote them. Not much, but... She gestured to a bag beneath her pillow. For your children. Let something good come from all this ugliness. Clarissa, please, let me do one right thing. Her eyes moved to Matthew. Take care of her. She's worth 10 of me. I know, Matthew said simply. I always knew. Clarissa smiled then, a ghost of her old beauty shining through. River. Pretty name for a boy. Like something that keeps flowing, finding its way past obstacles. How did you? I keep track. From a distance. Wanted to know you were happy. She closed her eyes. Tired now. Will you stay just for a bit? As long as you need. Eloise promised. Clarissa died that night, slipping away as quietly as morning mist. They arranged a simple burial, standing together in the Denver cemetery as her coffin was lowered into the ground. She was so unhappy, Eloise said quietly. Always wanting what others had, never seeing what she had herself. Some people are like that, Matthew replied, arm around her waist. Always looking at other folks' fields instead of tending their own. They returned to Redemption Creek to find spring in full bloom. River ran to meet them, chattering about the calf he'd helped birth and the cookies Mrs. Patterson had made. Life flowed on, as Clarissa had said, like a river finding its way. That evening, as they tucked River into bed, he asked, Where did you go? Eloise smoothed his hair. To say goodbye to someone. Were they nice? She thought about it. They tried to be, at the end. Sometimes that's all we can ask. Later, as she and Matthew sat on the porch watching the stars, she told him about the money Clarissa had left. It wasn't a fortune, but enough to start a school fund for River and the baby to come. She surprised me, Matthew admitted, finding some grace at the end. People can change, Eloise said softly. We're proof of that. What started as the worst night of our lives became the beginning of everything good. He pulled her close, hand gentle on her swollen belly. No regrets? None. Every hard moment led us here. She looked up at him. Would you change anything? Not a thing, he said firmly. Even the pain. It taught us to value what we have. Inside, River called out in his sleep, and Eloise went to check on him. She found him peaceful, clutching the wooden horse Matthew had carved, standing in his doorway. She marveled at the journey that had brought them here. A forced marriage born of humiliation and desperation had become a love story worthy of any fairy tale. They'd faced drought and wolves, gossip and legal challenges, loss and grief. But they'd also found partnership, passion, and purpose. They'd built a family on the ashes of disaster. Matthew joined her, arms encircling her from behind. Happy? He whispered. Completely, she answered. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. No longer a threat, just part of the wild landscape they'd claimed as home. The ranch slept peacefully under starlight, and in the small bedroom, a child dreamed safely, protected by parents who'd fought for the right to love each other. Eloise thought of Clarissa, finally at peace, and silently thanked her sister for the final gift. Not just the money, but the reminder of how precious their hard-won happiness was. Every morning she woke beside Matthew was a choice to love, to build, to hope. As they returned to their room, Matthew caught her hand. Dance with me, he said suddenly. There's no music, Don't need any. So they danced in their bedroom by lamplight, her belly bumping between them, both remembering another night years ago when they'd been strangers bound by desperation. Now they were partners bound by choice, love, and the thousand small moments that make a marriage. I love you, Mrs. Hale, Matthew murmured against her hair. And I love you, Mr. Hale, she replied, forever and always. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the promise of rain and good growing weather. Inside, two people who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances held each other close, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought them together. In the fairy tales Eloise had read as a girl, the princess always married her prince in the beginning, and they lived happily ever after. But real life, she'd learned, was messier and more complicated, and ultimately more beautiful. Sometimes you married the wrong person first. Sometimes love grew from duty. Sometimes happily ever after was something you built day by day, choice by choice, with hands made strong by work and hearts made wise by pain. As sleep finally claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms in the bed they'd shared through sorrow and joy. Eloise smiled. Their story might not have started like a fairy tale, but it had become something better, a real love, tested and true, as enduring as the land itself. And in the room down the hall, River slept peacefully, dreaming of horses and wide-open skies, secure in the love of parents who'd fought through fire to give him this life. Soon he'd have a sibling to protect and teach, another link in the chain of love that had begun with a runaway bride and a desperate choice. The Hale Ranch stood strong against the prairie wind, a testament to what two people could build when they chose to fight for love instead of settling for less. And somewhere in the starlit distance, a wolf sang to the moon, wild and free, reminding them all that the best things in life were worth fighting for. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reactions make this journey even more special. Don't forget to let me know what touched your heart most about Matthew and Eloise's unlikely romance.